You chose the worse option. You knew it was worse, and you chose it anyway. The standard explanation is that your brain misfired, a cognitive glitch, a bias, a failure of rational machinery. But what if the explanation gets the direction exactly backwards? What if the error was the system working precisely as designed? Tunna is improlition. The mainstream picture of human decision-making looks something like this. We have a rational mind, capable of weighing probabilities and maximizing outcomes. And then we have a set of systematic distortions, cognitive biases, that hijack that rational mind at the worst moments. We discount future rewards too steeply. We chase losses. We overweight vivid anecdotes and underweight dry statistics. We stay in bad jobs, bad relationships, bad habits, long past the point where a purely logical calculus would have us walking away. The framework that formalized this picture came largely from Kahneman and Tversky in the 1970s and 1980s. System 1 versus System 2. Fast thinking versus slow thinking. The intuitive brain making predictable errors that the deliberative brain sometimes catches and sometimes doesn't. It's a compelling architecture. It has genuine predictive power, and it has shaped everything from public health policy to the design of retirement savings programs. The biases themselves have names now. The sunk cost fallacy, hyperbolic discounting, the availability heuristic, the framing effect. They show up in textbooks, in TED Talks, in corporate training seminars. The implicit promise is that if you learn the names of your cognitive errors, you'll make better decisions. Awareness is antidote. That's the mainstream story. And it's not wrong, exactly, but it may be incomplete in a way that matters. The Hannabakois in Colas the Senethik se Shanana Mihe. Here's the gap that rarely gets named. Almost everything we know about cognitive bias comes from laboratory tasks. The Iowa gambling task, inter-temporal choice paradigms, betting tasks, hypothetical scenarios presented to undergraduates in controlled conditions. We measure irrational behavior in those settings. Then we generalize to the entire architecture of human decision-making. But what a laboratory strips away is precisely what the brain evolved to use. Consider what Antonio Damasio and colleagues were finding in the 1990s. Patients with damage to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex were, by standard cognitive measures, perfectly intact. They could reason, they could calculate probabilities, they performed normally on tests of logic, and yet they made catastrophically bad decisions in their actual lives, financially, socially, personally. They weren't irrational in the lab, they were incapacitated in the world. Damasio's somatic marker hypothesis, published in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society in 1996, proposed something that sounded almost heretical at the time. The body's emotional signals, what he called somatic markers, aren't noise interfering with rational decision-making. They're a compressed encoding of everything the organism has learned about consequences. They're the fast prior. Strip them out, and you don't get a purer reasoner. You get someone who can't decide what to order for lunch. Ullmann, anatomical diagram of prefrontal cortex with somatic pathway highlighted. This suggests a different framing for what we call bias. When researchers like Korteling, Brouwer, and Todt laid out a neural network framework for cognitive bias in Frontiers in Psychology in 2018, one of their core arguments was that many biases aren't malfunctions. They're the outputs of systems optimized for different constraints than the ones our laboratory tasks impose. Optimization for speed, for robustness under uncertainty, for social coherence, for survival in environments where the cost of a false negative vastly exceeded the cost of a false positive. The error looks like an error only when you compare it to an ideal that the brain was never shaped to approximate. Let's be specific about what the neuroscience actually shows and what it doesn't. On the question of temporal discounting, the tendency to prefer smaller immediate rewards over larger delayed ones, the neural picture is more complicated than the impulsive brain overrides the patient brain. A 2011 review by Peters and Bushel in Trends in Cognitive Sciences examined the neural mechanisms of intertemporal choice and found evidence for multiple overlapping valuation systems, not a simple war between impulse and control. The ventral striatum, the anterior cingulate cortex, the prefrontal cortex. These regions don't map cleanly onto irrational versus rational. They interact. The variability in discounting behavior across individuals and contexts reflects variability in how those systems integrate, not a fixed irrationality dial. On the question of value representation itself, how the brain encodes how much is this worth, A 2024 study in Nature Communications by Jurowitz, Sleazer, and Mehta proposed something genuinely novel. They found evidence for a curvilinear geometry in how value is represented in neural circuits, and they showed that what looks like irrational choice, violations of standard value transitivity, can emerge naturally from that geometry. The irrationality isn't a bug layered on top of the representation. It's a mathematical consequence of the representation structure. What about the role of the orbitofrontal cortex, a region long associated with reward-based decision-making? A 2017 study by Barris, Hosking, and Cocker, published in Neuroscience, used a rodent betting task to examine what happens when the orbitofrontal cortex is inactivated. The finding was counterintuitive. Inactivation actually reduced irrational choice on certain measures. This suggests the orbitofrontal cortex isn't simply a rationality engine. It may be involved in generating particular forms of risk-seeking behavior, and its contributions to decision-making are context-dependent in ways that complicate simple narratives. There's also the question of learning under uncertainty. A 2015 study by Scholl, Kohling, Nellison, and colleagues in the Journal of Neuroscience examined how the brain processes real versus hypothetical rewards and effort. They found partially overlapping but distinct neural mechanisms, which matters because many bias studies use hypothetical scenarios. The brain doesn't treat imagined consequences identically to experienced ones. When we ask people to choose between hypothetical monetary options in a scanner, we may be studying a specialized mode of cognition that has limited ecological validity for the decisions that actually shape lives. And there's a sex-linked dimension that the field has historically underplayed. A 2022 review in the Journal of Neuroscience by Orsini, Brown, and Hodges documented meaningful sex differences in the neural mechanisms mediating reward motivation and risk-based decision-making. These differences are real, are tied to hormonal and circuit-level factors, and they interact with the specific type of reward involved: food, gambling, drug-related cues. A single universal model of irrational decision-making may be papering over heterogeneity that matters. None of this proves that cognitive biases don't exist or that they don't cause harm. They do. The evidence on that is clear. What it doesn't prove is that the biases are simply errors with no signal in them, that they are purely noise to be engineered away. So what does this mean for how you understand your own decisions? Not that you should trust every impulse, that would be a different kind of error. But consider what it means to call something a bias. It means you've defined a correct answer, measured the deviation, and labeled the deviation as failure. In a laboratory, with a well-specified problem and a knowable right answer, that's a coherent procedure. Your life is not a well-specified problem. When you feel reluctant to take a job that looks good on paper, that reluctance may be Damasio's somatic marker system running a compressed probability estimate over everything your body has learned about situations like this one. It might be wrong. It's also not nothing. The feeling carries information even when it doesn't carry certainty. Luck in any wapiri bortazo, environmental light, contemplative postures. When you discount a future reward more steeply than an economist would recommend, you're also implicitly accounting for uncertainty about whether that future will materialize, whether you'll be there to collect it, whether your preferences will be the same. Hyperbolic discounting looks irrational against a fixed future assumption. The future is not fixed. Hyperbolic discounting looks irrational against a fixed future assumption. The future is not fixed. The neural circuit findings suggest your brain isn't failing to be rational. It's solving a different problem than the one researchers set up for it. A problem defined by evolutionary pressures, by the specific texture of your history, by the social and environmental context that the laboratory deliberately excludes. That reframe doesn't make the biases harmless. It makes them interpretable. Du das reluct. Closism interpretable. Closism interpretable. Here's where I land, reluctantly, because I'm not sure it's satisfying. The cognitive bias literature captures something real. The neuroscience of value and decision-making is revealing something real. And right now, those two bodies of work are not fully reconciled. The laboratory findings and the circuit-level findings often point in slightly different directions, and the field hasn't resolved that tension cleanly. What I keep returning to is this. The same brain architecture that produces the errors also produced everything that got us here. The errors and the competencies are not separable systems. They're the same system, viewed from different angles, under different constraints. Maybe the better question isn't why do I make irrational decisions? Maybe it's Rational by whose standard and for which world? I don't think we've answered that yet. The research behind this video draws from Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London, Series B, Biological Sciences, Frontiers in Psychology, the Journal of Neuroscience, the Official Journal of the Society for Neuroscience, Brain Research Reviews, Trends in Cognitive Sciences, Neuroscience, Nature Communications. Every claim traces to a published source. Full citations are in the description below. If the way this channel thinks about neuroscience resonates with you, subscribing helps this work reach people who'd appreciate it. New videos on the science of mind every week.